Hey, Mike,
Hey, how's it going, Dan?
not bad. Hey, every time I see you, I think probably want to see that Tom Thumb that I was messing with. You
Oh,
have
yeah.
just a second.
A Tom Thumb. Hmm. I would have thought a grocery store at this moment.
Well, here you go. I managed to let me see. Here's the front. It came out pretty good.
Oh, yeah, that looks
Oh,
nice. Yeah, and those knobs look great.
Yeah, yeah. And believe it or not, they're close to the originals. They're close enough for me. How's that? And then
hmm.
on it took me the longest time to find the antenna.
Oh,
The antenna is actually, here, let me hold this up a little bit better, get a little light on it. These contacts right here, it's actually buried under the gator skin on the side of this dumb thing.
oh
Interesting.
dear.
And I couldn't figure out where it was. I thought it was this thing, but this is just they give you a place to loop the power cord. And it's it it came out great. And I there was one little bare spot where the gator had been worn through, and I just took uh, I bought some of these ink pens that actually, instead of being or paint pens, instead of being ink, they're paint, and
Hmm.
you can you can use them just like a paintbrush.
Right.
I added some dots, and I threw some. I bought some of this stuff by whatchamacallit. It's a water-based polyurethane, and believe it or not, it's the only thing I found that works on everything.
Huh.
In other words, if you want to put the old catch on the side is a little slow. If you want to put a finish on just about anything, you buy it in satin and in gloss. I don't know if they make a flat, but it's a water-based polyurethane, and it's really handy. You don't get in a lot of trouble with it. It isn't like some things where you put it on something and it curdles or it models or it does something funky to your pen.
Right.
So
Well, you got to really thank Pat for those knobs. He was the one that found them. I just sent them to you.
that's for the lunchbox. That I got the lunchbox over here.
Oh, okay.
Well, that's a nice thing. Glad there was knobs to be found for that.
Here's the lunchbox I finished.
Oh, yeah, that's the one. Okay, cool.
Yeah, a little Motorola
Oh,
lunchbox.
Motorola.
And this is the one, uh, they had springs in these hinges across the top that actually, the hinges link the the antenna that's in the door to the radio.
Oh,
Well, I lost somewhere along the line. They didn't come with any springs in the hinges, so there's really a bad contact, and I haven't fixed it yet. But I am going to. I'm going to take a piece of solder wick and put some heat shrink over it, and then tack it on to the contact on either side and bypass the hinge.
Right.
But you'll notice this finish that's on it.
oh,
Notice how it's mottled or crackled a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I actually used. Thank God, I found out that in burgundy that this thing is painted with, there's only one or two shades, so I never worried about matching it. But I wanted to get the finish right, and the finish was that really light. And a lot of the old radios had them, a lot of portables, a lot of the old radios. And I used when I did my transoceanic, I used Herculiner that you put on the floor of pickup trucks and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
oh
I
yeah.
used that to patch my patched my transoceanic together, and it came out good. And the nice thing about it is it's a really light crackle, and that's what I used on this little radio. And then I taught, and before I did anything like that, I got a piece of cardboard and I shot it with the stuff, and then I shot it with the paint, the spray paint, and it came out great. It came out great. So
That's good to know. I'll have to remember that.
yeah, it's one of those things that I don't know what you say about it. You know, it's it is, and it's cheap as all get out, and it gives you, it's a wonderfully consistent finish. It doesn't glob on you or create big rough spots and white spots and all that. I don't know how they make it so homogeneous, but they do. So
Dan, you want to hold it up to the camera again?
what's that?
Like the one with the pickup bed liner on it. So
This one?
Yeah. I was going to ask, I tried to refinish old Philco car radios, and they have, I wouldn't call it a crinkle finish, but a textured finish, and I can't even come close.
Yeah, and I'll tell you what, like I said, it'll take paint, but experiment for yourself. I just took a piece of cardboard and I shot it with the Herculiner and then shot paint over the top of it. And it will give you a really nice finish that is very surprising, very surprising.
Just buy this at Home Depot, do you, or AutoZone?
Oh, no, auto parts stores, probably more a surer bet.
Yeah. And those paint pens, is there a brand for those, or where do you get them?
What's that?
The paint pens you talked about earlier.
Oh,
touching.
I got those online, and I'd have to go over and look up a couple of things. Oh, I'll let me move this, put this stuff away. Yeah, I'll look up. I've got my file, my eBay file, and I'll look up and see where I got them from.
Well, that's fine. If you just had a name, I could find it, I'm sure.
Oh, okay. I'll go over it. I got one in the. I know where all the ones in the drawer are. It's here. It's called STA pigment liner.
STA?
Yeah, STA and
Yeah,
pigment
pigment.
liner.
Okay. All right, I'll poke around.
Yeah, and they're it's kind of fun. I've had, you know, where on some radios I nick a piece of paint someplace that's cut black and stuff like this, and I know I should go grab a can of paint, and I just grab this thing and I go and touch it up.
You had better luck than I did. I was restoring a I don't remember the brand, but I scratched the surface underneath the dial. It was kind of a pinkish gray.
Oh my!
I tried to match. I couldn't come close. And so I finally bit the bullet. I removed the panel, if you will, sanded it down, went to Home Depot. I found almost the exact same color in an aerosol can. Came out looking beautiful, but boy, I agonized that for a long time. Of course, it was somebody else's radio, so I wanted it to look nice.
Yeah, you know, it's sometimes, and you know, there used to be a place down in Fife that did custom rattle cans.
Oh,
Right now, I couldn't tell you where to go to get a custom rattle can. I don't know any place that makes them anymore. Where you can go in and get a custom rattle can. It's, it's,
yeah, I wouldn't begin to know either. It was just dumb luck, because I forget the name of the color, something kind of unusual, but darn if it didn't. It looked close enough. Nobody ever would notice.
yeah,
Yeah.
Because
Oh.
I painted the
wait
whole
a minute.
panel. It wasn't a case of trying to match the color by then.
yeah.
And there was a auto supply place called CarQuest that would custom make paint and fill it in a spray can for you.
Mhm.
Well, they're
Well,
still out there.
if CarQuest does, I only know of one CarQuest store.
Yeah.
They made
On
some for
Al,
me on it for a car, and it worked great.
there's one on Allen Boulevard in Beaverton. At
Here we
least there
go.
used to be.
Let me throw this in here. There. I'll throw that in there since that seemed to have come up. Okay, now.
I don't see Linda with us today.
No. No, Jerry. Sorry.
Probably didn't like my topic.
Lost out. I don't know. Maybe she could have had other things to do.
I had a good OSHA question for her.
I'm not to complain.
This is funny, actually.
What's this, Jerry?
I had an OSHA question for her.
What's this question?
This is kind of a funny one. I read that a
Yeah,
guy was working for a contractor. He was on a ladder, and
Okay.
he
Yeah.
fell. And
Oh, yes.
and his boss yelled, "You're fired," before he hit the ground.
Oh, dear.
So was he covered?
I don't know. I have to figure that one out.
Cute question, huh?
Yeah. But I should know these things.
Well, Franklin, do you want me to go ahead and start or wait a few minutes?
Yeah, go ahead. It's 10. We got 10, 13 people here already, so that's great. Fantastic.
Okay.
Good to see everybody.
Oh, sure, Franklin.
So I thought tonight we'd talk about desoldering. So I'm sure everyone knows how to solder, but I thought maybe we'd go the opposite way and remove the solder. There's lots of different tools. We'll talk about all the different ones. I'll show you examples of a bunch of them. But some of your basic tools is you could just use your soldering iron. They have soldering irons with manual suction pumps in them. There's the desoldering guns. I think Mark showed one yesterday or last week. I'll show another one. They actually have desoldering stations where the pumps are in the station rather than in the gun. They've got the solder sucker bulbs as well as spring loaded. There's actually for PCB stuff, the SMD parts. SMD stands for surface mounted device. they actually have these desoldering tweezers, which are really cool. You can use hot air, solder wick. We'll talk a lot about that. And then, of course, when you're soldering, you want to make sure you don't overheat things. So you can use heat sink clamps or Kapton tape, aluminum foil. We'll talk about those things. And then there's some really good aids for desoldering, hemostats or the soldering aid, tweezers, reverse tweezers, helping hands, PCB vise. And then there's some other things about, I don't know if you've seen Chip Quick or some of the low temp solders, that can actually help you quite a bit in desoldering, as well as just using 6040 lead solder. So, here's just some examples. Here's the hemostats and the solder sucker. The old bulb one. This is my least favorite one. This is Kapton tape. What Kapton tape is, it's a high heat tape, and you can put that around. They use that a lot when they're using hot air for desoldering. It'll keep the heat off of other things. And of course, solder wick. This over here is a hot air gun, and they'll have different nozzles, and you can adjust the temperature as well as the airflow. This is one of the old soldering aids, really valuable. We'll talk a little bit more about these. I use it quite a bit when I'm using point-to-point routing or point-to-point wiring if I'm desoldering. This is the newer style of the Hiko desoldering gun. These things are amazing. These work really well also. For myself, I really hate using two hands for things. And this is nice if you've, you can push this down, and with one hand, you can desolder and suck at the same time. This is an example of some tweezers. This is one I really not fond of. Again, it takes more than one hand to use. And of course, just your regular soldering iron. There's always new stuff coming out. Some basic tips is use flux and be patient, and use solder to remove solder. Those are probably the two biggest things that you can learn. Is flux can actually help you, and it a lot of times, and we'll talk more about this, but solder over time can actually build a layer on top of it, an insulating layer, thermal insulating barrier, the oxidation. And if you apply a little bit of leaded solder, 6040 solder to it, it'll be amazing how quickly you can actually desolder something. So again, adding solder to remove solder, it sounds silly, but it'll allow that solder to melt a lot better. The problem is also if you're using things that use the newer lead-free solders, that melts at a higher temperature, and it's actually a lot harder to unsolder. And then there's some special solder called Chip Quick that you can buy that has an extremely low melting point. And if you add that to your existing solder, the cool thing is it'll actually stay liquid for a lot longer time, giving you more time to remove the solder without overheating the component that you're trying to unsolder. And again, oxidation is really one of your worst enemies. It creates that thermal barrier that makes it hard to desolder. And the oxidation can be not only on the solder joint, but on your soldering tip. So you really want to make sure that your soldering iron is tinned and is clean, and that you're using the right size for the job. If you're trying to unsolder, say, a ground lead from a metal case, you're going to want a big enough soldering iron to actually heat that. And even on PCBs, if you've got a large ground plane, it's amazing how quick that heat transfer will pull the heat away from the joint. So, you know, being able to get good heat transfer is really a key. Also, cutting out components. If you're not going to be reusing the component, if you cut it out with some diagonal pliers, it will actually help you quite a bit, because you can remove the individual leads a lot of times a lot easier than you can trying to get the whole component out in one piece. If you're using braid, use the correct size braid. I try to kind of match the braid to the size of the wire that or joint that I'm using. The problem is if you use a really big braid on fine traces, say on a printed circuit board, typically you're going to have a smaller soldering iron when you're soldering on a small circuit board. And if you use a large braid, what happens is that braid will transfer all the heat into the braid and not to the solder joint. So that's why they make smaller braid, so that you don't have all that heat transfer. And you really don't want to overheat the board, because if you overheat the PCB, you can actually lift the traces right on the PCB. Especially a lot of the older boards, the glue will come off of them pretty quickly. And a lot of times the through holes in them do not actually have copper going all the way through them, and so that trace will come right up. The newer multi-layer PCBs, they usually have the through hole is connected all the way through, and that'll actually help keep the trace down. Another thing to really be careful of is making sure you're not burning adjacent wires with your iron. As we probably have all seen, anyone that's unsoldered anything, you know, it's really easy to have the side of your soldering iron burning something up next to it. So you got to really be careful of that. You know, I like to, you know, practice techniques. Pick up an old radio chassis with point-to-point wiring, or some old PCBs, and practice different techniques of desoldering. It will help you a great deal. I had to pull a HDMI connector off of a PCB, and those things are horrible. They have, I think there's 20 some very fine pins right next to each other, and I had to use hot air. I happened to have a bunch of old boards, and I think it took me like 4 before I finally got the right technique, and I actually destroyed 3 of the 4 before I finally started doing it correctly. I find almost all desoldering ends with using braid. What I'll end up doing is I'll either desolder using a solder sucker or something like that to get a majority of the solder off. And then, like, if I'm on a PCB, a lot of times I'll just run braid right over it to clean up the surface. Or if I want to pull that last little bit out, I'll use braid to help suck that out. I'm going to stop here for a second, open it up to questions or comments from anyone.
Yeah, you know, I've used a waffle iron to preheat the board,
Yep.
and you know, if you're going to, especially my waffle iron tends to get very hot, so I'll put a layer of hardy board, which is a concrete board, between the iron and that, and let it preheat the board, and then it tends to, if you're going to pull it. The other thing is I've had a tough time finding solder wick that has enough flux in it to where it works.
Yep.
I went through 2 or 3 vendors before I found a decent, and it's not big stuff. It's not even a 1/4 inch wide, but it does work good. It really pulls. And you know, you can tell when you got lousy solder. I mean, the old stuff, when I first got into business in the 70s, they had it so tinned that it was actually, it was silver. It wasn't copper when you went after the board with it. So the wick itself is very important to have a good wick.
It is. And in fact, we'll be talking about a little bit of that. I think what I'll do is I'll stop sharing as I've done, and I'll just kind of show you some of the different
Mike?
irons I have.
Mike,
yeah, go
may I ask a question?
Sure.
So I have solder wick, but it's old.
Yes.
Is there a way to recover that? Because it doesn't seem to wick very well.
Yeah. So they're exactly what Dan was saying. Solder wick comes in two different ways. And I actually have some crappy stuff here. The generic solder wick, a lot of times, especially if you're buying it off of Amazon or something like that, may not have flux on it. A lot of the good solder wicks, what is it, Chemtronics, I think is one. It's expensive, but they actually have flux in the braid itself, and that will allow it to wick a lot better. The problem is if you have older solder wick, like this is some pretty old stuff. I don't know if you can even tell, but it's tarnished, so it's got oxidation on it. And that oxidation, again, is going to prevent the solder from sticking. So what I do is there's two different ways to do it. I usually use this. I use, this is rosin paste or flex paste. And what I'll do is before I use my wick, I'll just take and I'll just run it through like that. And now I've got some paste on it and it will work like new again. It's really amazing. The other thing you can do is you can buy liquid rosin, and I have that especially when I'm using boards and stuff. And this is an old COVID test thing. I love these things. For all of our old COVID tests, I kept all of the little eyedropper things because it's great. You can put flux in it and then it'll just drip perfectly. And you could put a couple drips on your flux and it'll put a couple drips on your braid and then it'll start working just like new again.
Okay, thank you.
You bet. Yeah, that's a real pain, when it doesn't work. So I'll start with my least favorite. This is probably my least favorite. I've got a couple of them. I have no idea why. I guess they're good for blowing air if I want to blow air, but for sucking solder, I hate these things. And the reason why I hate them is when I'm soldering or desoldering, I'm usually trying to hold the board or something else, and it's really hard to hold two things at once, at least for me. So it's hard for me to hold the soldering iron, real steady right in there and then get this in place and use it. I mean, it can be done, but I don't really like that. It's mainly because you're squeezing as you go. And so then you've got, these kind of suckers. I've got a bunch of different ones and they work a little bit better because the nice thing is you can pull it down to charge it. And so this is a little bit easier if you're using your soldering iron. You get your soldering iron in close, you get this right in there, then you just have to push the button to release it. That's a lot better than trying to, to have this in there and try to squeeze the ball and things like that. So these actually work reasonably well. They're not very expensive, and but it still requires two hands. So they actually have, and I love these. These actually work really good. If you're looking for being on the less expensive side and automating things a little bit, this one is the same pump action. You push that in, but the nice thing is it's all built into the soldering iron. And so you can actually use this to heat up, add extra solder. So you're not using two different things. And then when you're ready to go, you just push the button and it sucks the solder up. These actually work really well. I've got a couple of them and they're pretty nice.
I saw one of those, like a picture of one that went way back at Boeing, back in early part of electronics, and it was a full-size vacuum pump. A full-size vacuum pump with a heated iron. And I mean, I don't know what they were unsoldering, but they it was enormous.
Yeah, so this one's called the solder gobbler.
Yeah.
These things are like $500, but this is it uses a venturi, so you connect this into an air. So if you have compressed air, you can connect this in. This is more kind of like what they might use, I would guess, in more of an industrial type of an area where you'd have have compressed air, but you can use something like this. Let's see, what else do I got here? And then the ultimate tool, and if you don't, I don't know how to pronounce it, I apologize. It's either Hako or Hako. I don't know. I've heard it both ways, but Hako is a well-known brand name. If you've never heard of them before, they're the premium soldering iron makers these days. And these things are amazing. This is an older one. Oops, am I still, oh, I haven't, let's see, let me cancel it.
I priced one. That's a pricey piece of hardware you got in your hand. That's about
Yeah.
$100 worth of hardware.
Yeah, they sell for the new ones, I think, what are they, Mark? 3 1/4, 350, something like that. Mark has one. But yeah, this is an older one. I actually picked this up at a garage sale for 35 bucks. And I'll tell you, if you want to splurge, or if you're doing a lot of unsoldering, honestly, it's worth every penny. It really is worth every penny. You just push the button and it'll suck it up. They heat up really fast. The Hakos are known for heating up really fast. I mean, I can plug this in and I can be desoldering in a minute, and then it catches all the solder in this little glass tube, and then you can dump it out. And it's got the vacuum pump. The newer ones, the 930, I think, the one that Mark has, it's a lot smaller, but these things are amazing. I highly recommend it. There's a few knockoff brands and stuff. I've seen reviews on them. I'm not sure that they're as good as the Hakos.
I don't know if this is a side issue or so, but it's important to know what you're trying to draw too. Because I had about a 1928 Edison, 2030 Edison, and the wire was so shaggy and the solder was so shaky. I mean, it was like I tried, I tried using solder sucker on it and get it warm and pull it off, and the stuff came off in this funny looking globule kind of way.
Yeah. And that's where, if you add 60/40 solder as you're soldering, before you desolder, add solder to it.
Oh,
It'll blend into all that old cruddy solder, and then it'll just come out just beautiful.
I will remember that next time. I hope you got it from me. I hope there's never a next time.
Well, I'll tell you, anytime you're soldering, I almost always add solder before I desolder. In anything I do, because if you just add you don't even need much. If you just start by adding just a little bit and then suck it, it'll come right off, because that's 60, and that's using 60/40, not the
Right.
not the high temp stuff. Because it'll just blend in. It does two things. The solder that you're putting on is hot enough. It'll help melt the other one, and then it'll break all that oxidation, and it kind of mixes in with the solder and lowers the temperature. So yeah, I highly recommend always doing that.
Oh, Mike, this last tool you showed the little container that collects the solder.
Yeah.
I'm finding that many solder suckers, you haven't mentioned this, it's a pain to get the used solder out of them.
Oh, so, like on this one, all I have to do is just, let's see, I just pop it out here, and then this just comes apart, and I can clean it right up.
Now, many of the suckers have plastic tips that melt when you use them.
I have not seen that. Even like these are all a Teflon tip.
Like
I
that
mean,
one, yes.
I don't know how much heat you're applying to it, but it usually takes a lot. Like all the rest of these are all metal tips.
Yeah, I have spring-loaded old Radio Shack ones,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, the thing is, you can get replacement tips
mhm.
for not much money. The other thing I wanted to mention about the spring-loaded guys is you have to watch out for the recoil. So, like just recently, I broke the tab off of a volume control with the recoil on that thing, right? And so I had to solder it back on, and then I was afraid to solder to it. So I got some high temperature JB weld to hold the whole thing together so I could solder it again.
Wow,
But the recoil is, an issue.
I've never noticed that. You're saying that like when you
So
push
yeah,
this
when
in-
when you push the button, then the thing is gonna go forward.
Oh, I didn't
No,
realize.
it goes, the initial thing on the tip is gonna go forward. It's gonna go down, right? The recoil, basically.
Oh, so it hits
So-
like a hammer.
Yeah, so when you're pushing on something, you're trying to suck the solder off of it. When you hit that spring, it's gonna push it down against whatever you're sucking it off of.
I've never seen that, but I'll keep that in mind. Thank you.
Well, I mean, it's, for something that's fragile. I mean, I think this thing was probably already partially broken when I did it, but then it totally broke loose right at the edge of the volume control, right where it goes into the casing.
Right.
And I managed to solder it back, but then I thought, well, now when I put the lead on it, I'm going to melt the solder again, right?
Yeah, I've never seen a recoil related issue with it for myself, but
Yeah, well, it's fragile stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think it was probably already almost broken.
so some other things that I do, and I'll talk more about it, but just having like a little heat sink clamp here, really nice to have. If you're worried about, injecting too much heat while you're trying to desolder, you can just clamp this on a lead.
And you can use alligator clips.
Yeah, I actually use hemostats a lot. That's my go-to thing. The nice thing about them is they're locking. And so like if I'm gonna pull a resistor or something off, a lot of times I'll just clamp on it. And because they're locking, they'll stay locked. See if I can find one here. Come on, can't get my fingers to work. There we go. So I can sit here and I can pull down on that while I'm heating on here, and I can pull them out from the board. I do that a lot rather than even worrying about trying to clean the, to suck it. I'll just heat it with a soldering iron. I'll use this on one side because they're clamped. Once I clamp it on that lead, it'll lock, and so I don't lose it. The other thing I use is the reverse tweezers. If you don't have these, oh, you got to get these. It's the kind where you push in to open, and then when you let go, they close up. These are really handy because again, you're not trying to hold something. You can tweeze them, and then you can let go, and you don't have to keep pressure on. The other thing I was mentioning was these solder aids. I don't know if you can still buy them. You used to find them a lot in like the old Weller solder guns and stuff like that, in the kits. And if you have these are awesome for point-to-point wiring. Let's see, this one's got a bigger one. I use this one a lot. If you look here, it's got that little fork tip on it. It is great for going in. And if you want to untwist a wire around a lug, you can just put that fork on there and twist it and untwist it. That's really helpful. Plus there's always a pick. This one here, it's got a really fine pick that you can actually use, to clean out bigger holes, things like that. Most of the time they're either made of stainless steel or aluminum. And the reason why they do that is that way solder won't stick to them. So you're not soldering your pick into the thing that you're trying to desolder. So yeah, if you find these, you might find them very useful, especially if you get one with a nice sized fork like that. It's great for just, like I say, putting around the wire, and then you could just twist it as you heat it up to untwist that wire. Anything else from anyone? Great comments. Thank you, Myron. Let's go back to sharing.
Hey, Mike, I did have one quick question. Can anyone reuse the solder you pick up from the solder sucker?
I am one of the cheaper people around, and I don't do that. I'm all for using fresh solder. I wouldn't reuse it. Because for one thing, especially if it's older solder, I want to get rid of it, and I want nice fresh solder to make sure that it's going to stick with no impurities.
Do you have any opinions on this new, well, that's not new, but all tin solder almost? I've got a roll of it. It came with this one solder iron I bought.
Oh, is that the 93% SN?
Yeah,
I have some. I never use it. I have gone back to using 60/40 lead only. Just
me
because
too.
it melts and flows so much better.
Yeah, there's what
and
they
you don't
call
have to have the
eutectic
same heat.
range there.
Well, and it doesn't breed hairs. That's what the danger of tin is. They had to throw out a whole bunch of circuit boards back in the 80s because somebody brought in the wrong solder and got it in the system, and it was almost a pure tin. Or no, it was yeah. Instead of having the boards coated with the 60/40, they coated with a pure tin, and it grew hairs and it shorted the card out eventually.
Mm.
And so that's a kind of, I kind of wonder at the fact that they now seem to be proffering this stuff as the thing to use.
I don't know. It's been a long time since I've used this word, but I was studying a course in thermodynamics, and they were talking about the eutectic range, they called it, where
Right.
60/40 was the perfect place for solder, and anything else was worse.
Yes. Yeah. The eutectic range is where it, let's see, it's basically how it crystallizes, right? If I remember right.
Yeah, solder is an alloy of tin and lead. And all two metal alloys have a eutectic graph, if you will.
Eutectic point.
So the melting point as a function of temperature. And actually the ideal mix of tin and lead is 63-37, not 60/40. You can actually buy the 63-37 mix solder, and that is ideal because it goes directly from a liquid to a solid with no in between phase.
Oh,
And you
cool.
can still buy that.
Well, when I'm building something, if I'm joining like two pieces of brass together, like 1/4-inch brass or something like that, I'll use 90-10 with a torch.
Yeah. Well, I would use silver solder for something like that myself, but yeah.
When 90-10 seems to work really well. If you're, you have, it takes a little patience to use it because it doesn't flow easily, but the 90-10 does have a great deal of strength.
Yep. Oh, that's true. Okay.
Yeah, so here's
Oh, shoot. I did it again.
Thanks, Gary.
if you can see it.
Is that legal to buy these days?
Oh, yeah.
The 63-37?
Oh yeah.
Sure.
Yeah,
Glad
there's,
the government took all that good stuff off the market.
we haven't told them about it yet.
Okay. Check
Well,
it out at garage sales.
there was a movement. That's the reason for that high tin content solder, but 60/40 is still readily available.
Oh,
Yeah, so here's some general techniques. If the part being removed is not being reused, I highly recommend trying to cut the leads off, as it's going to make your removal a lot easier. I know even like when I'm doing a lot of point-to-point wiring, if I'm replacing capacitors and stuff, a lot of times I'll cut out the capacitor, I'll solder suck it, and then I'll even go and maybe cut the loop if I couldn't get to it any other way. I'll try to cut that loop in half, and then I can start pulling it apart. Don't feel like you have to try to always remove things in one piece. And then we already talked about the oxidation. Flux and new solder both can be used to break that barrier. You just want to identify the joint to desolder and then touch some new 6040 on it. And then it will work. And I'll show a video of that, of a lady doing that. You know, it's just the way to remove solder. Anytime. I always hit it with a little bit of 6040.
You know, I use, when I have, especially one that's very crowded, and I know that I could lose my orientation pretty easy, I'll just go to the capacitor and cut the lead at the end of the capacitors, and then just take my new capacitor and hook the ends and pinch the hooks onto the old leads and solder it in.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that. I'll even double hook it if the other leads are long enough, and I can do that. Two hooks and then pinch them together.
That is definitely a way of doing it. Here's an example. This lady is removing some chips from the board, and she's got actually a solder gun, you know, a desoldering gun here, a vacuum gun. And if you watch, what she's doing is she's adding solder as she does it. You know, she just adds a little bit and then sucks it, adds it and sucks it. And that simple little bit about adding that little extra solder will make all the difference. If she didn't do that, she may struggle getting that chip out even.
I've seen a lady do it must have been a 64-pin fine pin microprocessor.
Yeah, and I'll show some ways of doing some of that actually makes life really easy. Let's see. So yeah, if you're unsoldering and worried about overheating it, you know, use a heat sink clamp, hemostats, anything like that. When you want to remove excess flux, and that's another thing, you know, flux works good also to help doing desoldering. And that's a lot of what you're doing when you're adding solder. You know, we all use the rosin core solder probably, and so the rosin in there is really helping that, removing the excess flux, or excuse me, removing that oxidation so that it'll work. So you can use some isopropyl on a Q-tip to clean up any of the excess flux. If possible, make sure your work is secure. You know, I like using a PCB vise. I'll show you what one looks like to help if it's moving around, if possible. You know, otherwise, just position whatever you're working on such that it's stable. It's really going to help you from not inadvertently touching other things. In tight areas, what I'll do, and I kind of learned this trick when I was doing a lot of welding, is practice your movement. You know, practice what the movement would be. You know, I'm going to take my gun and or my iron, and I'm going to move it in between these wires into this spot, and make a couple repetitions before you do it. And maybe you want to reposition things a little bit until that movement is comfortable. It will really help you in making sure that you're not burning up things that's on the side. The other thing you can do if you're worried about touching other components and stuff, aluminum foil works really good because it's you can actually form it around things, so you can shroud stuff. I've actually used pieces of aluminum foil works well, or the Kapton tape. Anything like that, it's really worth that extra few seconds of shielding it if you're in a tight area. And then a lot of times, I think kind of like what Dan was saying, I like to take pictures before I start desoldering, especially in point-to-point wiring, because it's really easy to take a component out and then turn around and look and go, where the heck did this go? And I don't know if anyone else has had that problem, but for me, you know, I like taking a picture so I can go back and see how things were routed. And especially, I was just recently working on this oscillator for an impedance bridge, and it was really tight quarters, and I actually had to unsolder a bunch of components to get down to the lower components. And so I had stuff going everywhere. So having pictures really helped me see how to realign things. Anybody have any comments regarding this? Has anyone burned up anything?
No, I use a soldering gun more than an iron, and I'm finding that trying to desolder, quite often the solder builds up on the tip, and you get way too much solder on it. And luckily, I have a concrete floor in my shop, and I just fling it as hard as I can, and it flies off the tip and onto the floor, and it kind of restores the tip, and it'll keep on going. I don't know if anyone's ever done that, but it works.
It can work. What I use, I prefer to use is I've gone from the old sponge to the brass Brillo pad kind of thing. The brass pads work really well. They will keep your tip clean, and they will remove the excess stuff without flinging the solder all over your shop. Although I must admit, I have done that a few times too. I've taken just kind of hit it in my hand like that to knock it off. But I try not to do that as much, because then I'm always peeling it off my table as it's stuck. Anybody have any horror stories about burning nearby components? No? Boy, am I the only one? Okay. Solder braid. Typically, you'll find that chisel tips work best with solder braid, I found. Because when it comes to soldering, we'll talk about this a little bit later, but when it comes to soldering, most all soldering, it's not the amount of heat, it's about heat transfer. And if you look at a gun that's, or say a really big soldering iron, well, it may be the exact same wattage as a smaller soldering iron, but the difference is the tip is bigger. And so that heating element is heating up that mass, and it's that mass that transfers the heat to the to whatever you're working on. And so if you have a chisel tip, you have a little bit bigger surface area. Again, you want to keep it tinned and clean, but once you put it on that braid, it's going to actually transfer that heat a lot better into the braid, which is now going to allow it to suck up that solder. If you can, as I mentioned, get solder braid with flux in it, as Dave was talking about. With what do you do when it's not sticking? Well, if you've got non-flux braid, or if the braid was oxidized, just add some solder paste or even some liquid flux to it, and it will make a huge difference. It'll be like it was brand new and work like it's supposed to. And as I also mentioned, match the braid size to what you're working on. Too small a braid, it'll not wick enough solder. Too big a braid can act as a heat sink on really small things. What I like to do when I use the braid is I usually do a really bad job of cutting the old solder off the braid. So I'll usually have like 4 inches of soldered braid hanging out the end. But what I'll do is once I put the braid on the thing that I'm unsoldering, and I'll put the soldering iron on it, I'll take the hand that's holding the braid and I'll wiggle it back and forth a little bit. And a lot of times that kind of opens up the braid a little bit and allows the solder to get wicked into the braid a little bit easier. Let's see. Sometimes if you add a little tiny bit of solder on the tip of your iron, it'll actually get the capillary action going on the braid also. Although I find that the flux works better. In a pinch, you can always try doing that, and that'll kind of get things going. And again, if it's not sticking, add some flux to it. Or I usually just pull it over the paste. And actually, Dan mentioned this earlier in one of his radios. Solder braid's really good for ground straps or other kind. If you ever you need something kind of thick and flexible, solder braid actually works good as wire. I've used it for wire on a couple things before. So, you know, it's kind of cool stuff to have because you can use it for multiple things.
Maybe a ground strap.
Yep, I've used it for ground strap more than once.
Hey, Mike, do you happen to know why, maybe it's capillary action, why solder flows in the direction of the heat? It is attracted by the heat.
Oh, did I quit sharing? I apologize. I just went through those foils and I didn't share, did I?
And I haven't seen, yeah.
There we go. Here, I'll go back to that slide that we were talking about on solder braid. So I'm sorry, say that again.
So do you heat the solder braid and then put it on there?
No,
Or
what
the
I do,
solder flows toward the heat.
so what I'll do is I'll put, you know, if I've got my braid and say I've just kind of slid it across the flex paste. What I'll do is I'll set that braid right on top of the thing that I'm desoldering, and then I'll put my soldering iron on top of the braid.
Okay.
And then that solder will wick up from where it's at into the braid, coming towards my soldering iron. And it'll do a really good job. It'll wick right up there. Did I state that correctly? Anyone else want to comment? Let's see.
I think you're right, Mike.
Yeah, and what I was talking about with, you know, if I'm unsoldering something, I'll put my braid on it like this, and then I'll put my soldering iron on it, and then a lot of times I'll just kind of wiggle it a little bit back and forth like that, and that seems to help promote the wicking at times.
Mike, what sort of power of soldering irons do you typically use for soldering and desoldering? Are they different?
The wattage of the soldering iron I use is going to be solely based on the size of the work that I'm doing. I will resize things accordingly. Let me grab a couple here. So I have lots and lots of different soldering irons for different jobs. This isn't a very good one, but this is, I've actually got a soldering station that I use, and the tip on it's actually, let's see, I'll put my finger up there. It's a lot smaller than this that I normally use, because, and then this one, let's see, is, I think it's like a 40 watt. Most all of the ones I use are in the 40 watt range. Then I've got like this one with a big tip. Here's my finger next to it. I will use this one if I'm trying to solder onto a big case. You know, if I'm trying to do the, you know, connect the grounds to a case, I'll use one because, and this one it probably has about the same wattage. It's a Weller. I think it's a 60. Oh no, this is 100 watt. This is 100 watt, but the big key is the big tip on it allows the heat transfer. This is one I use probably for my larger stuff more than anything. And I think it's a 40 watt, but it's got a nice size chisel tip. There's my finger next to it. You know, it's not as big as this one, but this one does an amazing job. The chisel tip gives me a good job. But I would say to answer your question, in the 40 to 60 watt, I usually am soldering at 700 to 750, usually around 750 degrees, if that helps at all. And it's interesting, you know, all of these irons are going to all be in the 750 range, but it's their mass that makes the difference.
Okay, well, I've been using like a tip of a fine tip on my soldering iron, and a lot of times I find it difficult to especially on point-to-point stuff to to get enough heat on there. So that's a good idea about getting a chisel tip.
Yeah, I think if you go with the chisel tip, you'll do better with the point to point. And see, this is an example of a PCB vise. I've got a couple different ones. This one will open up pretty big. I've got a smaller one. These are great because you can mount your printed circuit board, right in between there. And so you can work on it and you can adjust the size and all that. Very helpful when you're working on a PCB outside. Let's see, while I'm still on camera, I'll jump ahead a little bit. If I'm removing something like this capacitor on the board, I may not actually use a solder sucker. What I'll do is I'll just hold my finger on it, and then I'll heat it up, and I'll just kind of push it, and then the one lead will pop off. Then I'll flip it around the other way, and I'll heat it, and I'll just pop it off with my finger. That's actually the fastest way. For this X cap here, I would do the same thing. I just put my finger there, come over here, heat until it starts to wiggle, and then I'll just go back. And then sometimes I have to go back a couple times, but you can just kind of rock it right off that way. And you'll find that a lot of times a lot faster than trying to, desolder something sometimes, especially if you've got a lot of things to remove. I'll do that. If I wanted to pull this fuse, that's where I might use the hemostats on one side, put a little bit of pressure on it, heat it up, and I'll just pull it through. Then once I get that done, I'll usually go through a solder wick, clean up the board, that sort of thing. Let's see. Yeah, something like these resistors here that are sticking up in the air. What I would do there is I would just grab it, heat it on one side, pull it, and then heat the other side and pull it. Sometimes you can get too technical, sitting there trying to use all these different tools, and it can be cumbersome at times because the different tools may not always work. The solder suckers may not get everything out. The other thing that'll happen on PCBs is when you do solder socket or solder wick or whatever, it still may be stuck in there. And if you take a little screwdriver and you push on the lead, a lot of times you can break it free of the solder and pull it out. See, let me go back to sharing again.
What do you do to keep the traces from coming up sometimes, like on PCBs like that?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So the key, I think, is the key to having traces not come up, and it will happen. I mean, because the traces could be bad, especially on single-sided boards. If there's been pressure put on them, they'll already be loose. But what I'll do is it's all about heat. I'll make sure I use the right size iron. I won't use a really big iron if I'm dealing with PCBs. I'll try to size my iron to the size of the traces. And then what I want to do is I want a hot iron because I want to apply heat quickly and for a very short period of time. One of the worst things you can do, in my opinion, is use a cold iron, because if you're using a cold iron, what you have to do is stay on there longer. And so it allows it to really, everything heats up. You're loosening up the glue on the back of the trace and everything else. But if you can heat it fast and get out of there, to me, that's the most important thing. And then again, another thing is just, you got to be careful. On the surface mount stuff, it's some of the worst because if you apply a little bit of pressure, those traces can just rip right off. So, you just want to make sure everything is nice and smooth before you and moving before you try to lift it.
Now, Mike, if you actually lift a trace,
yes,
I'm just wondering if a person would apply super glue, does that make the harder to resolder to that trace later?
Well, you'd only want to do the super glue underneath. Typically,
Yeah.
I've never done that. Maybe others can comment. What I will do is if the trace is lifted, most of the time what happens is when the trace lifts, it also breaks. And it's going to leave right where it bends over. You're going to have a weak spot, and more than likely you're going to have a bad joint there.
So just jumper it with a wire.
Exactly. I will use a small piece of copper wire. I'll loop it around, come back, and I'll go up the trace a little bit farther and then solder it back on. That's usually what I do. If the trace is still there, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll reinsert the component, trying to put the trace back where it was. I'll do a little tack, and then I'll still add some wire. Anybody else have thoughts on that?
What I've done is use an eraser to scratch the trace a little bit up the area to get
Oh
it
yeah, yeah.
and the shellac or whatever's on the board away from it. Then then it'll solder really quickly to a nice fresh trace that way.
Oh
But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you need to take something. A lot of times I'll use an X-Acto knife and just kind of, go back and forth real carefully to break that, because there is a coating over the trace. So you'll have to work it back, an 1/8 of an inch or a 1/4 of an inch, however far, before it'll solder. And then the other thing you can do is you can add a little bit of a solder bump through the whole thing, to build up that solder trace. And that's perfectly legal. So point-to-point wiring has some unique challenges a lot of times because the components are buried, and the wires can be wrapped around lugs. We've talked about this a little bit. One thing I do is something you should never do when you're soldering is I try to create a cold joint. So I'll heat up the joint and I'll keep wiggling the wire while it's cooling. And by doing that, it prevents it from sticking. You create a cold joint, and then a lot of times you're able to actually untie it. If you couldn't get all the solder off of it. So if you just keep wiggling it, you'll find that as the solder solidifies, your wire will be loose. Does anybody else do that?
I've done it many times.
Yeah, it's a great tip of being able to get some wires off. Also, if the point-to-point wiring is wrapped really tight around the lug, you can try to use wire cutters. I've got some flush cut ones that I use. Actually, I'll grab those and show them to you in a minute. But the flush cut ones work really good. Once I get most of the solder off, if I can get a little bit of that loop sticking up on there, even if there's solder on it, I'll take my flush cut wire cutters and I'll cut the edge of that loop. And then what I'll do is I'll reheat it, and then the loop comes apart and I can usually untie it that way. And as I mentioned, the soldering aid with the hook to unwrap it. If you can find those soldering aids, I don't know if you guys use those, but if you have one, it's really awesome for unwrapping wire. And you can also use the hemostats too. If you can sometimes lock them on one edge of the wire, then heat it up, and then you can use the hemostat to unwrap it also. And again, it may be maybe necessary to remove components to get to some joints when in the point-to-point stuff. So if you're doing that, it's good to take pictures or I think as Dan said, sometimes cut the leads long so that you know where they're coming from, things like that, so you can track them down. And again, be careful not melting other things. Aluminum foil, again, is really great to put around stuff, especially if you've got a local oscillator transformer or something like that, that you don't want to burn. And boy, it doesn't take much for that side of that soldering iron to touch it. PCB soldering, let's see, let me jump. For multiple pins, let me see if I can jump to this. What you can do is this is a really cool tip. Say you've got this through-hole connector here and you've got a whole bunch of pins going across there. Well, this is a pain in the ass to take apart because you either need to unsolder all of them individually, using a gun or solder sucker or something. And then there's always going to be a couple of them that are sticky and you can never get them off. But what you do, and if they're far apart, you can actually use a piece of wire and just wrap it around them. If they're not far apart, and you can do this on components, ICs and stuff, what you do is you just add solder all the way across of them and just make this whole thing a big, huge solder bridge. Then once you've got a solder bridge, you take your soldering iron and you move it back and forth. And because you've built a big solder bridge, and that solder will stay liquid, and you could just run that soldering iron back and forth, and you can grab those pins and just pull it right out. It's the easiest way to get rid of, if you've got a, let's see, actually, let me just stop sharing here and show you. So say I've got this chip here that I want to remove. I can go on this side, here's all the pins. I can build a solder bridge across both sides of them, and I can run my soldering iron back and forth real quick like that. And then on the back side, I can just pull that right out. And that works great for connectors. It works great for anything to where you've got lots of pins really close. It's a really cool tip, and it'll save you so much effort. It's quite amazing.
Hey, you know what's a good way to remove a multi-pin IC, like a dual inline pin IC?
How's that?
If you're removing it, it means you really don't care about it. Get in there with a pair of wire cutters and just clip every lead.
Yep.
And then remove the pins one at a time.
Yep, and you can do that with like the 8 and 16 pin ICs really well. And that was something I mentioned in the very beginning. Anytime you can cut stuff, you should definitely do it. I use these. These are the flush cut. They're really small. They get in there really close. And you can actually get in, just like Gary said, and go, one pin at a time and just cut them off.
And those
These work great.
I mean, they have real expensive flush cuts, and then they have these. These are fairly inexpensive, right?
Oh yeah. In fact, I think I bought a pack of 3 for $9 or something like that.
$2, and then you just keep using brand new ones. So they're nice and sharp. That's
Yeah, I use them a lot for my 3D printing, where I have to cut off all the little extra bits if I have a bunch of support areas, and that's when I learned about them. And boy, they're awesome, and they're great for electronics. Don't use them on big wide wires. It will screw them up, but for the small stuff, it'll work great. Thanks, Gary. Let's see. Go back to sharing here. Yeah, so again, you could run a bead of solder across, or you can even add a wire. One of the problems with some of the bigger chips nowadays, not like the 7404 or anything like that, but some of the big microprocessors and stuff, all of the pins are underneath. And so, they actually have what they call ball pins underneath. And so getting to those, unfortunately, you can't cut those.
No.
But let's see, run the wire back and forth, and then just pull it on the backside and they drop out. There's some other things you can do. We'll talk more about hot air in a second, but it will help shield things. For 2-pin SMDs, the surface mount devices, I don't have a pair of these. I would love some. If someone wants to get me a pair for Christmas, that'd be awesome. Is these soldering tweezers. And they actually, it's both sides of it is hot, and you can just put it right over the item and then pull it up. Those are really cool. But in lieu of that, you don't actually have to have soldering tweezers. And I did it just recently. You can actually use 2 soldering irons. You just take 2 soldering irons, no law against it, and then just hold it on each side of your resistor capacitor that's a surface mount device. You heat them both up at the same time, and you can just lift them right off. So it's nice if the two soldering irons are the same size. Otherwise, it kind of gets a kind of feeling. But
Now,
this actually works really well. I just pulled a capacitor off of a board doing this very thing.
now, Mike, I have seen a soldering tip that really had two parallel blades
Yep.
that would touch both sides at once. It was kind of like
Yes. And,
like a little box of such.
yep. Yeah, and they have those also. That's that was the early style of the soldering tweezers. Here's an example of the soldering tweezers. And then they also have a soldering tip that, as he mentioned, actually goes just directly over a particular sized object.
Mhm.
There's this stuff called Chip Quick, and it's used to lower the melting point. And at the end here, I have a little video that you can watch of how that works. But the cool thing about Chip Quick is it's a really low melting point solder. So what you do is you take the joint and you apply the Chip Quick to it, just like it just looks like regular solder. But when you apply it to it, what it does is it lowers the melting point of your existing alloy, right? Because it's mixing in with it. And the thing is, it allows it to stay molten for a lot longer time. And so you can actually, if you're pulling an IC, you could run that across all of them, build your bridge. And the nice thing is, it might still be molten by the time you go to the other side. And so it allows you to pull things out a little bit longer because that solder has a much lower melting point once you've mixed in this Chip Quick. After sucking solder from through holes, I don't know if you've ever noticed, but a lot of times, you get the item out. Now you've got a through hole, and you can spend a good 20 minutes sometimes trying to get those darn holes clean. And you can keep sucking and sucking, and they won't get clean. Well, one way you can do that, and it seems counterintuitive, but if you add a little bit of extra solder and then suck it, that hole will come clean. It's amazing. Again, you're adding solder to remove solder, but I don't know. Has anyone else had a problem trying to get a hole clean? Just add a little extra solder. Of course, you can always use like that pick that I showed, the soldering aid with the very fine pin point. You can do that. And then sometimes your pins will get stuck in there. Use a little screwdriver or something. And if you push sideways on your component, it'll usually break free. You'll hear it pop, and then you can pull it out of the hole.
Mike, you can get dental picks also.
Oh yeah, dental picks work
Harbor
good.
Freight sells them.
Yep. And we talked about this already with the through hole devices. If it's only 2 pins, it's pretty easy. You clamp a hemostat on it, or just grab it with your hands and pull it out. I've burned my fingers many times doing that. And if you turn the board over and heat the joint while pulling, sometimes that'll work. Electrolytic capacitors especially, you can usually just walk them out just by going side to side pressure and carefully rock them. And again, sometimes the solder braid won't even clean the hole, so just add a little extra solder. And then I already showed you the bridging. Hot air. This is, I'm going to call this a relatively new thing because, it was kind of the advent of surface mount devices, things like that. With surface mount devices, and actually Dan was mentioning this, a lot of times they will solder using hot plates. And you can do that for desoldering too. But the problem with hot plates for desoldering is you don't usually have the exact control on what you're desoldering. And so I typically don't use a hot plate for desoldering because you're unsoldering lots of, or you're basically flowing too much solder. But I will use a hot air gun, or the hot air. They're also known as reflow guns, and it's basically a hot air gun. You can get different kinds of nozzles for them. Let's see if I go back to the beginning here. They'll look like this, and they'll have all these different nozzles. These nozzles are made for, like this one will actually, I think, sit right over top of a chip or something like that. And you can heat it up. Now, the one thing that I've learned, I was a little surprised about, is that board gets hot. It gets really hot, but it appears the components can handle it because that's the way you do it. But you can heat it up, and you can pull the chips off. The other thing that you can do, if you when you're resoldering it, you'll use solder paste and you'll put on there, and then you just drop your component on there. And when you heat it with the hot air reflow gun, it's amazing. The solder will just flow to the spots, and you'll actually watch your little component shift right in position. It's one of the most amazing things. I highly recommend you looking at, go onto YouTube and watch videos on how to reflow solder.
Mike, if you mentioned how the components can withstand the heat, many circuit boards at the manufacturer are wave flow solder. The whole board goes over a wave of solder.
Exactly.
And
yes.
It really heats them up.
Yep. Yeah, I've been surprised on some of the things I was doing that I thought, boy, this can't be good. But as long as you keep the gun moving, you don't want to just set it on one spot. You keep the gun moving in that little area, it will loosen that part, and usually you'll have tweezers or something on the part as you're heating it, and you can just kind of push it and feel it. And the minute it starts moving, you pick it up and take the heat off. But it's quite amazing if you get into the world of surface mount devices, how they do things. I highly recommend practicing on scrap boards. Anywhere anytime you've got a piece of electronics that die, take the board out, practice on it. Work up to the complicated connectors and stuff. Start small, and you'll find it's actually not too bad to do. Again, use tweezers to feel if the component moves free. Don't try to lift components. This gets back to what Franklin was said about, how do you avoid ripping the traces? Well, one way to rip a trace, even on the small ones, is if you use tweezers and you're trying to lift up and it's not free yet, it will pull the trace up. But if you kind of push it sideways and then you feel the thing come free, then it's okay to do it. And again, here's some videos that I found that I thought were really good. Let me grab a board here.
BG.
Yeah, like here's an example of a chip that, that hot air gun would take that off. Or what I would do is, if I was to take that chip off, I would probably just bridge them all. I would just take solder and I'd bridge the whole thing, and then I could move back and forth real quick, and then it would just pop right off.
Yeah.
Questions, comments?
Well, there's also the ball grid array type of soldering as well. And that's a pain in the ass to have to deal with.
So a chip like this, I don't know if you can see that very well.
Oh, yeah.
But there's a lot of pins. Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to cut them, but this is the one to where you can actually do the bridging. You can either run a piece of copper wire on there and bridge it, and do it on all four sides. But there could be pins underneath too, and that's usually why you use hot air.
Yeah.
Once you heat this up, you know, and I'm gonna take my hot air gun and I'm gonna keep moving it in that area. I'll take the Kapton tape and I'll mask around it so I'm not heating other things.
Hmm.
And then once I can get it to move, I'll just be able to pull it off.
Mike, if you didn't want to save it, I hope this isn't a bad idea. What about hitting it with a Dremel to destroy it?
No, because the what you're trying to avoid is destroying the traces. And
Oh, okay.
and anything you know, that's the real danger. Other, you know, if it's big, yeah, you could do something like that. But if it's something like a chip like this, the problem is you're going to have to do something to lift it out, and there could be connections underneath. A lot of
Yeah.
times on these chips, there will be a metal back that's the heat sink that is soldered on there also. So that really, it's about the only way to get these off is with hot
Mm.
air, and then you'll just heat
Right.
it until the whole thing moves.
Mm.
Any other questions,
And-
comments?
Well, another thing you can do is actually put some flux on uh, the actual pins, and then it'll help you to remove the actual piece off of the board. I've seen many videos where what they'll do is they'll put a special liquid on top of the actual piece that they want to remove, and they heat it, and it makes it lift right out.
Oh yeah, that's the liquid flux. You know, if you're heating this, you definitely put the flux on because it's going to allow it to really improve it. But doing the bridging's another way.
Is there different kinds of flux for different applications? I noticed that they sell different. I don't know what the difference in the flux is, but
So I don't know either. I've got 3 kinds that I use. Let's see what's. So I have my flux paste, this stuff, and this works really good, especially if I'm trying to you know, if I've got something bigger that I want to kind of smear the paste on. I have the liquid flux, and I've got a big bottle that comes in, and this is really nice if I'm working. What do you have there, Gary? You're muted, I think.
Gary's muted.
Yep.
Unmute.
Yeah.
There we
this is,
go.
The best flux,
this rosin flux.
good old rosin.
Yeah, that's the same as the stuff that's in this little vial. Like I say, I use the old COVID tests, and I use these little droppers because it's really great. I pour it out of that bottle into here, and then I've got a lot smaller thing rather than, because I that's too big for me to handle half the time. And so this just gives me a little tiny drop on the circuit board. But yeah, you got the needle there. Yep. But that flux I'll use when I'm working on PCBs, or if I want to get down into a small area. I've got the little long needle like that too that I use. And then I have this flux here, which is really nice. It's just a pen. And then I can, you know, if I push in on it, a little bit of the flux comes. And so if I'm working on a circuit board or something like that, and I want to control where my flux is, I can just kind of like draw it on right where it's at. And so, the pin is really nothing more than what Gary was showing and what's in here. It's just a liquid flux, but it's another way to apply it. And you can even use something like this in a point-to-point routing situation, to where if you're in a radio, you know, you can get down in and kind of like draw a little bit on one of the connectors that you're having trouble desoldering, and that'll get some flux right on that spot, and it's not dripping all over everything. Did everybody learn at least one thing that they didn't
Oh,
know?
yes.
many things.
Yeah.
We all learned many things, yes.
Thanks a lot, Mike. That was great.
You bet. Hey, Gary, how did that radio grill work?
Actually, I'm totally backed up, and I haven't gotten to it yet.
Oh no.
Gary,
I
you
can't wait
being
to
backed
hear.
up,
I had
Well,
to go
hopefully
pull it out and put it on.
screwed up my schedule of things.
Hopefully they at least look good to you though, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. They look great. Can't wait to
Except I didn't put all those big holes in it for you, like in your old one.
Yeah, I had to go away for a week on a business trip, so and it was right after I collected those from you, and I've only just got back a couple days ago.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm interested to hear how well they work. I'm hoping those holes line up. That was the hardest part, is trying to guess based on, broken lugs where everything goes. But
Right. Yep. Oh, I'm sure you did a great job.
thank you. All right. Well, that's all I have for everyone. Like I say, hopefully this was useful. As you
Oh,
can
yes.
see, I got way too much desoldering stuff.
Yeah, I can understand that. We all desolder. But one thing that a lot of people really don't take into consideration is really the BGA stuff, the ball grid array stuff. And soldering and desoldering ball grid array stuff is just a right pain.
Yeah, and that's where the hot air is really the only way to go.
Yeah. Because that's the way that they're doing a lot of the components these days, is surface mount or ball grid array stuff. And, it's like people come to, a part and they're like, how am I supposed to get this off? Or how am I supposed to replace this? And it becomes a pain for a lot of people, I'll tell you.
Oh, I got my circuit boards today for the Magic Eye.
Oh,
Actually identify landslide hazard areas.
So this is the circuit board for the LED Magic Eye.
oh,
And
wow.
each one of the lines is I'm going to have to put 3 LEDs on it.
Oof, that's going to be a pain.
So, and then this is the rest of the board. This is where all the circuitry goes.
Mm-hmm.
And then they fit together like that. And then,
Well, too bad I couldn't use something like that because mine's all European for the one that has the eye tube in it. And it's a vertical eye tube.
what
That's
I might
for eye
do,
tube replacement, huh?
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, it's a digital or it's an LED eye tube replacement. And the way it works is let's see, actually let me find his website again. I'll just share it. We talked about it last week.
Do you bypass the resistor that's in the base of the eye tube socket?
Let's see here.
Maybe.
A lot of people don't know about that. You take the socket apart, the female socket, and there's a resistor inside of it.
No, yeah.
I don't
So
know why.
what he's done is this is what it looks like initially, and then he puts a little diffuser on it, and this is an actual original one. But what you do is you put 3 LEDs on each section here. Let's see, let me go to his website. And from here to here is on all the time. And then it's only these that he's changing. And he used an IC that is for a matrix display. And so what he does is he turns, for each stage of the matrix, he'll turn the outside ones on, then the next ones all the way in till the eye is fully closed. And then on this inner one, he's changed it to where it's actually brighter. The voltage on it changes, so it's brighter. So it looks like they overlapped. And it's really doggone cool. I couldn't resist, so I bought one. Actually, I bought 4. And then he's even got the ones for the 6T5, which I guess has a little red light in the center. So he's got it set up to do that.
Mm.
But what you do is you just take a normal eye tube or any of the regular ones, and you carefully cut the glass and take the glass off, and all of these 2 circuit boards will fit inside that glass. And then you can just, put them back together. He used some heat shrink around the outside of it. But yeah, real cool concept. So I wanted to see if I could do it. But it'll be a little bit of a challenge to solder it. But the way I'm going to solder it is I'll put down solder paste, and then I'll use the hot air and go over it. And then all of the LEDs should mount on it. And if as soon as the LEDs are on order, as soon as they show up, I'm thinking what I'll do is if I can get one done right, maybe I'll do another one during the video here on Wednesday night, so you guys can actually see the hot air soldering.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, there's 120 LEDs I have to place on here and then solder them.
Oh, boy.
Your eyesight is good then.
No.
No, now, way back, I don't know if they still make them, but when I was at Boeing, they had a large, thick lens with a fluorescent light tube, a circular tube around the outside that was on a lamp that would move around, and you could look through that.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
I
That would
have
be
one.
really
That's
nice.
Magnifying lens. Yeah.
Big magnifying lens, yes, with a circular bulb around it.
Yep, I have one
Yes,
of
they
those
still
that I'll
make
be
those
using.
things.
Yep. And then I also have over here, I have a microscope that's for soldering that I can work underneath.
Okay, I'm having a lot of trouble soldering and desoldering fine things without some aid like that.
Yep. And actually, just the magnifying glasses, I wear them constantly.
Oh,
yeah.
Just something like this. Well, I end up using it a lot. I like this one because it's got a separate lens on the inside, so I can increase the magnification. Then I have a third one here if I need it.
very nice.
Oh, wow.
I mean, these are really inexpensive, and they're, that'll get you through a lot of stuff. And I'm needing it more and more as I get older.
Oh, yeah.
Pretty
We
soon
all
I'm
would.
walking around the streets with it on.
Oh, you.
Well, Derek, you're not at that age yet.
No, but still, I feel just as old.
You're gonna get there.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm. But yeah.
Yeah,
I
you're
feel
gonna hear
that
this thing about
old.
being welcome to the club that you didn't join.
No, I understand the situation. I've had the aches and pains of the older folk anyway, so I know exactly how it feels.
Was that a
I'm not to
donut you
complain
just
about it.
ate? I was
No,
getting-
that was just chicken strips.
I was
picked up
getting
the
hungry
window.
watching you eat that.
I know, Jerry. I had to do something. Well, let's see. What else am I going to pull out of this lovely refrigerator? Here we go. I'm going to get you now, Jerry.
Oh, you're gonna make it even worse. Oh wow, yeah. Oh, spiced? Never,
Yep.
haven't heard of it. Haven't heard of it.
It's a new thing, Jerry.
That gets you into the club faster.
Mm-hmm. There it be, spiced.
Yeah. Okay.
Now, that particular Zenith, I took that into that repair clinic this past Saturday. Found out a lot of the tubes in it were just at the, they were either, there were a few that might have been good, but then there were a few that were on the higher end of being in the bad section. And so I got to find more tubes for that thing, but I also have to replace its power cord since the power cord's all crunchy.
Now, Gary might have some of the tubes for the Sara has tubes.
Yeah, it was the fact that the NWVRS has the tubes as well, or at least Mike found one tube out of all of this mess. But that was only in the part of the collection that is taken care of by Mike himself. But then there's the collection that Pat has, that is the other part of the collection of tubes.
Now that's the Zenith with the bomber on the grill cloth.
That's right. I decided I've got to.
Did you ever find out how many were made or why it's so rare?
There's only 5,000 with the bomber that were made because let's see, it's
but many more with the ship.
Well, Mark was one that
yeah, I found that in one of the Zenith books. It talked about that that there was up to 5,000 made. It was right when the war broke out, before they shut down the production. I think before they shut down the civilian production, they made a run with the bomber grill cloth, I guess is what you'd say, on that particular style radio. There's up to 5,000 made. He's got a serial number that's right in that range, so it fits with what's in the book about that, I guess you'd say.
And I was lucky to even get that. Oh, I was in the right place at the right time. I would figure. And that Zenith, NFS, not for sale. I couldn't be happier about finding that Zenith for once and have it all there with the wave magnet. I'm like, well, that's a first. Try finding a wave magnet. Because you never find a radio that's all intact.
Not much.
No, because this one, even the handle on it, the leather handle is still there.
Well, Mike, thank you for the presentation. I have to leave, and good luck.
Uh-oh. Isn't your internet playing up again, Jerry?
Oh, it is. It's pausing and buffering and having all kinds of trouble right now. So
You have the worst internet luck.
Well, did I mention this to you that this last week, the FCC
Oh, yes.
redefined broadband?
Yeah, they
It's-
redefined what broadband is, and what you've got is more
Well,
in
yes,
line with DSL.
yeah, it's a 100 down and 200 or 20 up. 100 down and
Yeah.
20 up is the speed for
But
broadband today,
but you
minimum.
see, Jerry, when it says you're getting like 5 down, you're really probably getting a few hundred kilobits down and a few hundred kilobits up, if even that. That's how it works out.
I'm aware of the deficiencies, but yeah, many of you would drool at the property taxes I pay. Almost nothing compared to over there on the west side. Did
And
you
how
know
that ever happened, who is to say?
Do you know that if you have an open space ranch that you maybe let the neighbor put cattle on, the property taxes are approximately $1 an acre?
$1 an acre?
Yes,
So
sir.
you probably have 20 acres and are paying $20 worth of space.
Much more.
All right, I'm going to take off. Thanks, guys.
All right,
Thank
Mike.
you. I'll see you later.
Okay, let's see. Who else is still here? Oh,
Hey,
Pat left.
Maybe if you paid more taxes, you'd get better internet.
No, that's not the thing of it, Jerry or Gary. The thing of it is that really Jerry lives in an area where they can't really bring out a lot of regular phone line service or even wired internet service, and he's working on what is he's working with wireless service. And he is the last person in the chain to be put on the service. And the service is just so bad for his connection. It's not as stable as it should be. And then when other people further up the chain are, doing other things, major things, it ends up screwing with Jerry's internet. Oh, wait a minute. That's got to be either the Zenith or the Helicopters.
This one?
Yeah,
Yeah, it's a Zenith R7000.
because there there was I think was it the last meeting or was it the meeting before? One of the last two NWVRS meetings, we had a talk about a radio like that was one that was identical to what Zenith made, and it was the one that Helicopters made, and basically it was not on the Helicopters, or was it Heathkit?
Heathkit makes a clone, but Helicopters does too.
Yeah, it was Zenith that sued the one manufacturer. Was it the
Theirs
Heathkit?
was almost identical.
Yes, they were both identical, and it didn't last very long on the market either. because Zenith sent a cease and desist of get this off the market immediately. We
Yeah.
do not want a clone of anything of ours. Let me see. What was that thing? No. Zenith. Zenith. It was. Oh, that's right. Yeah, it was the that's what it was. It was like the I think it was the 3000 that had that clone that yeah. There's Zenith.
So in this book,
It had to have been the Royal 3000 that was the one that was cloned by either Helicrafters or Heathkit. No, it was Heathkit. That's what it was. It was Heathkit that cloned the 3000, and it looked exactly identical. But Zenith came along and said to Heathkit, get this off the market immediately. Yeah, I remember we had a whole talk about that very thing because it was the clone radio was put on display for the club meeting, and it was talked about as far as I remember.
so here's a picture of the Heathkit clone.
Yes,
And you can see
that's
it
it.
identical to a Royal 3000.
That's it. That's
Same.
the one that Zenith actually sued Helicrafters over and forced them to take it off the market.
Well, this one's a Heathkit.
Yeah, that's it. It was a Heathkit. That's right. That was the one that they wanted gone because they didn't want any clones. Wow. The things that we find out.
It says the GR43 Heathkit, although it looks very similar, it's totally different inside.
Yeah,
And
it had a few differences.
Had a limited production because Zenith required Heath to cease production due to patent infringement.
That's what it was.
Later on, Zenith owned Heathkit. They owned him
Yes.
from 1979 to 1989.
That's right.
If you can't beat them, buy them.
And those were very limited in production.
Yeah, so if you ever find a Heathkit transoceanic type set, it's probably pretty good.
And you're already working on a Zenith anyway.
Yeah, this is not mine, but it's a beautiful radio. I'm cleaning it up and I'm putting it back together now.
Handy things. But Royal 7000. Hmm.
Yeah, no, it's not the, there were a couple of different 7000s that they made, Zenith did. One has a D or a Y in the,
Oh yeah, the Ys, sure.
and then there's another R7000, which is from the 80s, and it's all IC based.
Hmm.
That was their last version. This one's the, it's, I don't know. I gotta look it up. It's probably their earliest one of the 7000 series.
Royals. Let me see here. I'll look that up.
Looks a lot like the 3000 inside, all discrete transistors, and has the same arrangement of.
Oh yeah, there it is. Let's see. So they had the R7000. So they had a -1, a -2. Let's see, what other ones? That's got to be the -1. That's what I'm figuring it is.
There's a chassis number on it.
Because if that's the earliest one, it's got to be a -1. Because the -2 had a slightly totally black front. But anyway, seems like everybody else left.
Yeah. It's you and me.
I guess everybody either wanted to go to bed or they wanted to go find a bite to eat.
So, how did you come by that? Is it the bomber version of the Zenith, or
Yeah. Well, it was Friday, the first of the month. I decided, well, I'll go down to Deseret Industries, way down there on 82nd in Portland, and I'm nosing through, and I'm looking around, and I'm doing my usual perusing in my usual sections, and then I thought, well, let's see what they've got in the collectibles cabinet. And lo and behold, here's this Zenith sitting there. I'm like, okay, I'm getting that. I had to track somebody down with a key just to be able to obtain said item.
Right.
But I inspected it, and I opened up the back, and lo and behold, here's the wave magnet still with it. And everything was still there. It had really not been touched, other than one tube was replaced. And I then closed it back up. I found that it still had the front cover to it, and I put the front cover on it. and I immediately went and paid for the darn thing. I was not going to let that thing get away from me.
Nice.
And the dial cord is still perfect in that thing.
Yeah. So it's just one band, right?
Yes.
Does the little red flag work?
As far as I'll show you. I'll show you this. Now, which side's the? Okay. Yeah. WITH. It, well, if I can get it close enough, you can kind of tell that there's a red flag in the window.
Yep. So when you turn it off, that flag should go away and turn black. And when you turn it on, that it'll show red. And that's to remind you that your radio is on and you're going to run your batteries down if you don't turn it off.
Yeah, it looks like when it's in the off position, it doesn't do anything, but
Okay. Well, that's something that can be easily adjusted. It's a
yeah.
little mechanical cam that's hooked up to the on-off volume control.
And it's still got the original wave magnet Z knobs.
Yep.
And I'm like, goof, that's a big luck. Yeah, it's a real big luck I found it.
Nice.
Oh yeah.
Be careful taking that apart. There's a sheet of asbestos in there.
Yeah, yeah. I know about that.
Okay. Yeah.
A wave magnet.
Also, those radios have rubber insulated wiring inside them, and it dries out and cracks.
Oh yeah.
Hopefully,
the power cord's already that way.
Right. Hopefully, the internal wiring is doesn't need any replacement, because if you just touch it or move it, it cracks and exposes the center conductor, the inside conductor, and some of those wires have 100 volts on them.
Well, I had it evaluated at the Repair Clark County event this past Saturday, and found that at least some of the actual tubes were right at the upper end of the red section. And there are a few that were good, but a lot of them were in the upper end of the red section. And then there was one tube that was totally dead.
Well, totally dead.
So,
but if it's still, near the weak zone, a lot of times those tubes will work just fine in a radio.
Yeah.
I've had a lot
in
of
my
times
case,
they look weak, or they look like they're in the red fail area, but they'll play just fine when you put them back in the radio.
yeah, this thing, it actually did power up, and we got it to make some kind of noise out of it. But it wasn't really much, and it was probably due to the fact that there was a dead tube and the weaker tubes. Because that thing hadn't been touched in God knows. Because the only thing I ever saw that was really ever done to it was the fact that it had the one of the tubes was replaced with a Sylvania.
Yeah, let me take you over to the other side of the room here.
Okay, Gary.
So see behind. Let me turn the camera around.
10-4.
Okay. Oh, I gotta do
Okay.
this. Out.
Yeah.
Set the camera.
Okay, there it is. Oh,
See
that
the-
one looks that's almost close to what I have.
Very similar. And it's missing its front cover.
Well, it isn't most of those were missing the front cover after so many years.
Yeah, so I don't know if you can see, but when you turn the knob on, that flag comes up.
Oh,
And you
yes.
turn it off, it goes away. And there's a little spring that does the pulling away. Maybe yours, the spring is disconnected and needs to be reconnected.
Could be.
But I've gone through and restored that radio, and like I said, it needed full recapping. It needed to be totally rewired because all
Oh,
the
wow.
wiring. And I did a mistake, and I wired
No.
B plus wire to the filament pin on one of the tubes. It took out 3 tubes, so I had to replace 3 different tubes because of that mistake.
Yeah, the one thing also of this radio is it still has a battery with it.
Oh, wow. Take that out and just set it aside as a display item, because I'll bet you don't get any voltage out of that battery.
Eesh. Well, I'm just going to leave it there as it is because it hasn't done anything to the radio,
Right. Now it's probably all dried up.
and it's still connected. I mean, the connector to it is still there.
I got a couple of those old batteries that I just keep out for kind of display items because
But this one is a different battery altogether, where it's one entire battery instead of
a battery pack that has A and B in both of them in one package.
Yeah, that's what it is. It's an AB battery, and it uses one connector to connect to the radio directly.
Right. Must have more than 2 pins on that.
Yeah, and the battery, it says on the battery. No, you stay there. Wait, magnet. Okay. Oh, that's how I do it. I gotta put that wave magnet down like that, like that. It says, important notice, your Zenith radio is designed to give the best service when operated with a genuine Zenith battery pack. To avoid possible tube burnouts and other damage, always replace this battery with a genuine Zenith battery. See your nearest Zenith dealer.
Yeah. They all say that same thing.
And then it says, this battery is designed for use on Zenith model numbers. Let's see here. Let me get a better light on this idea. Model number 5G 500R, 5G 501, 5G 505, 6G 601, 6G 001, 6G 004, 7G 605, and 8G 005.
Wow. So which one do you have?
It's a 6G 601.
Okay. Got 6 tubes in it.
Yeah. Let me see. Whoop. Let me see if I can find a. Let's see. 6G601. Now the 6G601 had different letters after the model number, and that basically told you mostly what type of material was used on the cabinet.
Oh yeah, because they made them in kind of a beige color and a dark brown color. And
The 601D, 6G601D, the D variant was blue and gray airplane fabric. The L was genuine top grade cowhide. M was brown airplane fabric. MH was brown and ivory airplane fabric. And the ML was simulated brown alligator.
Huh.
Now, the tubes that it actually uses, it has two 1LN5 tubes,
yep.
a 1LA6, a 1LH4, a 3Q5G, and a 117Z6G, which is really strange.
Yeah, that's only when you're running on AC power.
AC, it actually says it, where is it?
Okay.
Where did it say that? Let me see. Okay. Batteries 9 and 90 volt. So it's a 9 and a 90 volt in that giant battery.
Yeah.
Go figure. But as I see it, it hasn't been molested. It was basically donated the way it was, and I was the one that found it.
Yeah, that was a good find. Lucky you.
You're right. I'd been looking for a Zenith for God knows, and I finally found one.
Well, now you got to restore it.
Yeah, first I'll start with tubes. Then I'll see from there what it needs. But it's probably going to be a pain in the ass to have to deal with.
Yeah, it'll test your skills as far as rewiring, recapping, soldering.
Well, the wire really isn't too terrible. It's only the power cord that's really the terrible thing. But I've got a replacement for that. I'll tell you.
Okay, so I put this radio back together again and nothing's working.
Uh-oh. It's dead as a doornail.
It is. Dead as a
Oh, Gary. Did you forget to hook something up?
Well, we're gonna have to take a look and see if I got the batteries in correctly.
Or just try to run it off AC.
Well, I don't have the AC cord. The owner didn't give me the cord. And all he, oh, here we go. Now it's working. The AC battery switch was flaky.
Maybe a little deoxit will fix the matter.
Oh, La Cucaracha.
Yeah, all the Mexican stuff. It seems like a lot of stations around Seattle, or not all of them, but there's a few that have been taken over by the I guess the Spanish people.
Well, there's one little station across the sound that's pretty low power on one of the graveyard channels, and it's a Spanish-speaking station, Mexican. And right next door to it is a station that I talked about in my DX challenge column on 1480, and it's in Eureka, California. It's a fun one to listen to because they play
Hey,
all.
wait a minute. I'll give you this, Gary. Now this I'll tell you, if you could have ever have gotten it before they changed their format. There was a station that I could get at night when I used to live with my mother. And it was something I could only get at night. And it was way the screw down in California. And it was, was it 810, KGO as it was.
Oh, yeah.
And that was right, the very next frequency up was a religious station, 820. And that 820 was powerful at all times. But I got KGO at night. Oh, sure, I got them.
Well, there's 820.
That's,
oh yeah, holy rollers.
Yeah, you see how powerful they are? But if you went down one, you could get KGO if you had the right conditions for it. But KGO was very, you mostly got them way later at night and in the overnight hours. And then as the morning kind of crept up, the reception of KGO would fade and fade and fade and fade and fade and be gone.
Okay. I'm going to try to get it.
Then allow God to work on me. When I came my sword inside.
Let's see.
There it is.
It would never be a one-possession game again. 88-81, Grambling knocked off Montana State. Move on to take on Purdue coming up on Friday.
Wow, that thing is pulling in that thing real good.
Yeah, it's doing pretty well. And I don't know if
Holy
it's
hell.
810 or 800.
No, it's 810. That's it.
They're playing sports
Oh
right now.
my. That is it.
How can you tell?
Because they changed their formatting from being a news station to being a sports station,
Got
as
it.
I
Okay.
recall.
Yeah.
And that is it. And
Yeah.
I'm looking at the dial pointer and I'm like, that's it. And you're pulling it in just like it's no tomorrow.
Well, it's got a,
Oh,
I get a lot of stations from San Francisco Bay Area. There's one on 680 that comes in really good.
well, where I used to live, it was considered a hole, as we will say, because it was basically that we were closer to sea level than we were the regular higher up. So certain AM stuff didn't come in very well. And DXing was not the actual strong suit because there was a lot of electricity stuff around. But back when we had that power outage in November of 2022, I never forget that. That was the only time that that any radio would actually pick up anything. And that's when I ran that Sanyo for. That thing ran on batteries for well over 30 hours, and it still was functioning. And I was able to pick up the traffic, that 24-hour traffic station out of Vancouver, BC, clear as day.
Yeah, that's a pretty good radio, that Sanyo. It's not my best. There's a few others that are a little more sensitive and selective than that one. I think maybe it might need some peaking to get
It
it
might,
improved.
but I'm glad to have put it to your fingers,
Oh yeah, I love that thing. It's my ball game listener.
That's,
It's got really good sound. It's got a good speaker.
oh, it does. And a Sanyo being made that early, a lot of people have never seen a Sanyo that early.
Well, it's actually I think 1971 vintage. So it's not the earliest. I've seen Sanyos earlier than that, and they also made a lot of transistors for other radio companies.
Oh yeah.
Here's that traffic station from Canada. 24-hour traffic. That's all they do.
Uh-huh. AM 730.
Yeah. I like 690 too because it's CBC, Canada from Vancouver. Yeah. And the problem is you have to null out 710, which is so strong.
Well, yeah, 710 is strong, but that's 710. You go 2 up from 710, and you can get it if you've got the right conditions. You can get it.
Right.
But man, I'd never forget about that thing. I loved listening to it. 24-hour traffic.
Another good station to get from California, it's pretty easy, is 1530 out of Sacramento. KSDK.
Black, indigenous, and people of color.
It's a talk station.
Oh, 1530. At least you got it very nicely.
Yeah, it's always pretty clear. Most radios will pick it up.
Let me see if I can pull up something that will.
See if you can get that 1480 station. That'd be a really good one for you.
Okay, let's see. I left that bugger plugged into it. Let me see if I can do it.
Because these guys just don't have talent. Michael wants to put. You're amazing. I used to feel so anxious. Getting to know his mother, his uncle, his family.
Oh, for crap, corn's sake. Let me see here. Let me put this guy back on my touch. Let's see what I do. Nope.
I think they're kind of a combination between UCLA and Washington State. UCLA's physical, big body. Of the total cost of any maintenance or repairs you may need. The Lord has truly blessed my business and my family in so many ways. With assets depend on their divorce lawyer skills in these matters, and that's why it's so important to hire someone that has.
Oh, that's 700.
Try 1530. Try 1530.
I did, and I got Pete Turkey of nothing.
Oh, okay.
He had 3 rebounds. The Clippers shot 52%, 45 of 86. 13 to 31 from beyond the arc, 42%. We'll hear from Chelsea Billups before he finishes up. First special, you know, because to become really good at point, have those 80s, and you know, then you have those real guys, you know, that are champions.
See here.
Gary?
Hmm?
I'm going to take off.
Okay.
Play around with this radio and make sure it's working well before I.
Yeah, this thing, you know, this radio here, as you notice, it's just not the greatest Radio Shack thing. It's where they took they use a tuning chip rather than using the actual a coil, a tuning coil. And the chip does everything, which is really stupid.
Well, that's the way the GE Super Radios are. There's an IC, actually several ICs in there that do the work. And their most recent one doesn't even have a variable capacitor. It's a electronically tuned. And that's probably what that Radio Shack one you have does.
But it also,
The earlier super radios have a real analog capacitor in them. Those are the best ones.
Highs in the lower 50s. Chance of rain 90%. Forecast for the Western Columbia River Gorge. Tonight, showers likely.
So it's got a weather
Lows
band.
in the mid-40s.
mhm.
West wind 10 to 15 miles an hour. Chance of rain 70%. Rainfall amounts at 1/10 to 1/4 of an inch. Thursday, mostly cloudy. Showers likely in the morning, then a chance of rain in the afternoon. Highs in the upper 50s. West wind 5 to 10 miles an hour. Chance of rain 70%. Rainfall amounts less than 1/10 of an inch. Thursday night, mostly cloudy with a 50% chance of rain. Lows in the mid-40s.
Pretty good for a robot, huh?
Miles an hour, becoming light after.
It's
But
a little,
anyway.
the voice doesn't sound too mechanical.
No,
I should get going.
all right.
Have a nice evening, Derek.